Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I'm also the host of Moms Don't Have Time to Lose Weight, and I'm the editor of the anthology, which you should run out and buy, called Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. All proceeds of that book go to COVID-19 vaccine research. And I'm the editor-in-chief of Moms Don't Have Time to Write, a new publication on Medium, and we're accepting submissions, so please send your personal essays there. And if all that isn't enough, you can follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens, and my website is zibbyowens.com. Okay, now back to this amazing podcast. Mira Jacob is the author of Good Talk, a memoir in conversations. By the way, Mira and I co-hosted the Literacy Partners Gala online last year and had the best time ever, and you could probably find that at literacypartners.org. We had so much fun. It was like we'd been friends forever, and we said we had to do a podcast, so then we just did this podcast. Anyway, her graphic memoir, Good Talk, a memoir in conversations, was shortlisted for the National Book Critics Circle Award and longlisted for the PEN Open Book Award. And her novel, The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing, was named one of the best books of the year by Kirkus Reviews, The Boston Globe, Goodreads, Bustle, and The Millions. She lives in Brooklyn. Welcome, Mira. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss your book, Good Talk, a memoir in conversations.
Thanks for having me. Hi.
Hi. Mira, we had so much fun. I mean, that's an odd way to say it, but when we co-hosted the Literacy Partners Benefit, and now I feel like just so excited to get to interview you about your work.
I'm very excited about this too, and it was funny because we had not seen other humans in quite a while, and then we hosted this thing together, and that was like the closest I had gotten to a party. I mean, it was like us alone in a room talking, but I was like, it's basically a cocktail party. Like, it was amazing.
It was like a cocktail party, like streaming live to like tens of thousands of people, and we were like, yeah, we're just gonna have fun here. Anyway, okay, so your book is amazing. A graphic novel meets memoir about all sorts of things from your career, growing up, your family, race, your marriage, parenting. I mean, you have like literally every element that you could possibly think of in your life story here and you did it in such an original, unique way. So tell listeners a little about how you came up with the form of this book and how the whole thing came about.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so just to give them a kind of visual, what it looks like when you're kind of reading through the book is I do drawings of myself in various years and all the people in my life in various years, but I stick with one drawn version of us. So it's almost like a paper doll version that travels from page to page, and the backgrounds change. There are different photographs that we're situated in. So it looks like, the way that it looks is you're always looking at two people talking, but they are looking at you, the viewer, while they're having an intimate conversation. And it is, in fact, a memoir in conversations. My publisher came up with that title, which I have to tell you, the subtitle, when they said it's like a memoir in conversations, I lost my mind for a minute because I was like, I didn't write a memoir. And they said, they're like, you did. You actually, that is, in fact, this is a memoir. And I started laughing because I think if you had told me that I was going to write a memoir, I would not have believed it. And if you had told me even 4 years before, you're going to draw a graphic memoir, I wouldn't have believed it, mainly because I didn't really know how to draw. So that was, it was all this big learning curve. So how that happened is, it's really the first chapter really does tell this very specific story, and it was the first thing I drew for this book, which is my son, who was at the time 6, was obsessed with Michael Jackson, like deeply obsessed. Like, he knew all the moves, and he had like a glove and the hat, and he would just basically Michael Jackson out on demand. And then, because he was watching the videos all the time, he started asking me all these questions, like, is his skin like my skin? And what happened to his other glove? And, is that how people walk on the moon? And then at one point, he asked me, is Michael Jackson, because he had all the albums in his room, and he's like, is Michael Jackson brown or is he white? And I was like, yeah. Because how do you answer that question? And I said, he's black, so his skin is brown, and then he kind of turned white. And he goes, he turned white? And I said, yeah. And he goes, are you going to turn white? And I was like, no. And he said, am I going to turn white? And I was like, no. And he said, is Daddy going to turn white? And I said, Daddy's already white. And he goes, but was he always? And it was this terrible parenting moment where you realize you've done the wrong thing, right? Like, you set out with the best of intentions. You're like, I'm going to break this down for you. And instead you basically turn your kid's brain to scrambled eggs. So those questions escalated pretty quickly because that was 2014 and America was hitting a kind of inflection point that I think some of us felt much earlier than others. So a lot of things were coming onto our radar. One of them was Ferguson. The protests in Ferguson were going on, and he was asking about that because he had seen, turn off the TV as fast as you can, but a 6-year-old's going to soak in some things. And so he, I think at one point he came to me and said, there was a kid named Ferguson, and he was killed because he was brown by a white policeman. And I said, okay, his name was Michael Brown, and he was killed in a town called Ferguson. And, trying to help him, get the details right, but also like not really wanting to talk about exactly what was happening, because how do you convey the depth of what's happening and also not terrify a 6-year-old? And then that naturally led to all these other questions. Like he said, at one point he was like, are white people afraid of brown people? And I was sort of like, what do you say to that? And the thing I ended up saying to him, which was kind of unsatisfactory, I guess, just in the depths of my soul, I said sometimes. And I said that because I didn't want to lie to him. And because the way that I was brought up, my parents would have never said something like that to me. And it's not entirely because they didn't know it. I think they knew certain things, and I think they didn't want me to know certain things. And I think they were also first-generation immigrants trying really hard to ignore a lot of things so they could just get by day to day. My parents are from India. Anyway, and then Z asked, is Daddy afraid of us? And I kind of lost my mind. Not with him at that moment. With him at that moment, I just said, no. And then I went and I put him to bed, and I went and sat in the bathroom, which, as anyone who lives in New York knows, is the only place you can get any privacy. and just sort of shook for a really long time, because I think I understood right away that he was going to see and feel things about the world that were going to be very different than what his father felt, and somewhat what I felt, though we're definitely more aligned. He is brown-skinned. But also just the feeling of being overwhelmed of how do you say these ugly things that you know are true? How do you give your child enough information to protect him, but not so much that you shatter his confidence in the world? And when he's asking a question like, are white people afraid of brown people? What's the right answer, right? Yeah. So I drew it. That's basically, I drew that conversation. And that was the way I drew it is what you saw in that first chapter, which is I basically drew 2 little pictures of us. I ran to his room and I got all his Michael Jackson albums. And then I put us on top of them with that very intense conversation. And it felt really good to do that. It felt like I was doing something proactive. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah.
So,
I mean, that you win the prize for best parenting coping mechanism, I think.
Well, we're not talking about the bottles of tequila I also downed.
I mean, that's a foregone conclusion. But the drawing and turning it into this form, I mean, it is so hard to know how to process some of these big things and big questions. And this sort of fear that underlines your whole book of am I totally messing up my kid is just so universal, especially with these incredibly complicated things that are in the news every second. And even throughout your book, the language that Z was getting from the news, that you were constantly I can't believe he's saying this. And you have that one funny scene when your friend at the bar was saying something wow, that's what 4-year-olds say. What do babies learn these days? Because it's all so in your face right now. We can't hide it.
Yes. Yeah. And especially, in the years 2016 to 2020, a lot of it was some pretty boldly anti-woman, anti-immigrant, anti-people of color sentiments that were just kind of taken for granted at some point. It's this is an opinion that should be in the world. And this is a totally normal thing to talk about, how we don't like any of these things. And that was wild. Right? Trying to kind of raise a young brown boy in that, it was just sort of wow, how are we going to get through this with our skin on, and with you understanding that this isn't a way that people should really treat each other.
Yeah, so true. I found it so interesting the way you had to navigate your relationship with your in-laws in that time as well, and how you talked to your son about it. Tell me more about that.
So my in-laws in the same time, so I should also explain, I'm Indian. My parents are from India. I was born and raised here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We were the third Indian family to move into the state. This is according to the other two Indian families that were already there. So like highly scientific. And then my husband is white, Jewish American. His parents grew up in New York and they also moved to New Mexico. And so we knew each other for a very long time, though I don't think we even talked to each other before I was in my 20s. We kind of passed each other in hallways and I could pull him out of a crowd very easily, but I couldn't have told you anything about him other than, at one point he had like long hippie hair and sort of looked like Jesus and listened to the dead. And I think that's what I knew about him, which was really disappointing to punk me. Anyway.
I have like an identical person from my high school who that just brought to mind. So kind of wondering what he's up to. But anyway, keep going.
Put it on that guy. Yeah. So my husband's parents became in this same moment very pro-Trump. And it was really surprising. Actually, it was just totally shocking. I'd been in the family at this point, my husband and I have been together since 2000, and we've been married since 2003. And I'd been through every funeral and hospital visit and bar mitzvah and
bark mitzvah, which
and bark mitzvah, yes,
hilarious.
From the family dog, yes. We've just been through a lot of stuff, and I think I had this before. Sometimes you just have a sort of, if you don't look hard at something, especially an interracial relationship, you can put two very different things in the place of real knowledge. And one is complete doubt that that person knows or understands anything about you. And the other is a kind of faith that they see you and they get you and they have your back. And what I found out in that moment was that my in-laws did not see me or have my back. And it didn't really matter to, explaining to them, like, this is what this is doing to my community, to my family, who you love. This is what it's going to do to your grandson. They kind of felt like our vote is our vote, and you shouldn't bring politics into love, and you're making our family life about politics, which is rough, right? It's a rough, I understand why they think that, and I understand why their lives have been structured in a way that they're allowed to think that. Right? They've never had anything to kind of tell them differently. My husband would argue that their Jewishness tells them quite differently, and they did have another choice, and they should have made it. But I can't speak to that. I can only speak to the fact that that's not how it played out with us. And it was a real rift in our relationship. It was a real heartbreak, honestly. And at the same time, these are people who are such good parents to my husband. And really good grandparents to my son. And so what do you do and how do you hold all those things? And that sort of became the conundrum of like my life and then also the book.
Yep. What were the ramifications of your including all of that in the book?
That's such an interesting question because I guess what I would say is they were both big, meaning my family, instead of me holding all of the pain and discomfort that caused, which is usually what happens, right? Like it's usually that the person who is in the minority and who is processing the real violence of the situation is also, it's just sort of on them to do it unless they confront someone. And a book in some way is a confrontation. And so I think it was hard in the way that it wasn't like, how do I say this? It wasn't, I think, we had many reasoned and loving conversations, but at the end of the day, the book is my opinion and the book is my version of what's happening. And I think whenever that happens, the person on the other end feels out of control. I did send them to the book in galley form, knowing that if they said, you got this wrong, this isn't what we said, this isn't how it is, this isn't how we feel, I would have to revisit those passages. But they didn't say that because I didn't get it wrong. I just told my side of it. And that's kind of the worst part of the heartbreak, right?
Yeah.
Like nothing I wrote was untrue. It's just that painful.
I thought maybe them reading it or seeing it like that might have opened up.
Oh, no, girl, that's the white fantasy. No.
Okay.
I swear, like that is always always the white fantasy of this. And no, it did not happen. And also, I will say, like, in the writing of it, I'm sure in the beginning, there was a part of me that also felt like if I just explain this well enough, if you just understand how deep the stakes are right now and everything you're compromising with this thing that you think is seemingly, your own and no one else is to worry about, your vote. If I just explain it well enough, you will understand me, which is, again, like something that I do think a lot of brown and black people do. If I just prove my value enough, you will find me worthy. If I just show you my humanity enough, you will protect it. And that's not really how it plays out very often at all. The problem of racism in America is not a problem of white people not understanding our humanity. It's them choosing to do nothing about it.
Wow, that was beautifully said. I feel like so important and so beautiful and so just crystallized and getting to the heart of the most divisive issues facing all of us right now. And again, your use of the word heartbreak feels so right. I mean, it's hard to hear someone's story and not be moved to it or moved to act or whatever. Anyway, beautifully said. I'm sorry for perpetuating the fantasy. I guess I just have to hope.
Of course. No, and also, like, honestly, we are hardwired to perpetuate that fantasy. Like, everything that you've grown up with perpetuates that fantasy. Me too. Everything we've grown up with is built around this idea of white goodness and white saviorism, and that, like, ultimately this will happen. This is a thing that does happen and will happen. But that's not really true unless people really decide to dig deep. And they rarely want to because it's painful. Like, I understand that. It's not that I'm unsympathetic to that. I hate digging deep on things that I know don't show me in a great light, and also that mean that I'm going to have to do, like, years of work. Who wants to do years of work? No one, right? No one. So it's not that I'm unsympathetic to that at all. And it's not that I'm also not guilty of it myself. I completely am. But it's still devastating.
Ugh. Well, in your book, you also, I just was particularly struck by your 9/11 scenes because, we're recording this a day before 9/11 and this episode will come out afterwards. But just the scene of you on the sidewalk and talking to your dad and the realization of what was happening and your use of photography and just the way you've told that story, the way you tell all these stories in this unique way is just so moving. And I am like 100% convinced that one of my best friends was standing in the exact same place that you were. And I wish there was some way to, like, take a video camera because the two of you should have been, maybe you even interacted. I don't know. But she was, like, right there at the same time. But
wow.
Yeah. But how does it, having this in the book and now with this anniversary right now, how are you feeling about that?
Whew. So 9/11 was so traumatic for so many different people around the world, right? It was deeply traumatic on many levels. For us, and when I'm saying us this time, I'm talking about Indians and South Asians in America, specifically also South Asian Americans who, like me, many of us had grown up understanding that America had a way to sort of slot every other race had a place, right? So it's like, are you going to, like, we're watching what happens to Black Americans. Are you going to be treated in that way? Are you going to be treated the way Mexican Americans are treated? Are you going to be treated the way Chinese Americans are treated? And Indians are kind of coming into this country was recent enough at that point. We were just growing up. Those of us who had been, kind of born in this country, were among that first generation, just sort of watching, what is our thing going to be? What are they going to think of us? What are they going to decide about us, right? Mm-hmm. And what happened in that moment was suddenly and very quickly afterward, America decided it was very terrified of faces like ours and that we had done something to the country and that we should be terrorized and kicked out. And what that meant was a lot of our uncles and brothers and aunts and sisters were being, sort of violently attacked. And no one was talking about it. And there was also a feeling of like, well, if that's happened, I'm sorry, but look what happened to us. As though we weren't ourselves American. As though we ourselves did not lose our city too. So when I think about it, and we're coming up on the 20th anniversary, which is so wild.
So wild.
When I think about it, I think about the sort of end of anything close to the sort of hopeful naivete about how America would take us in, or not, we were already here, so we're American, but like how America would kind of help us flourish in this country, or at least accept us. And then I also just think about what it was like to be a New Yorker, which we both know, and it was just devastating, right? Like it was so awful to be here, and the smell and the sounds and the terror and the fear of what it meant for everybody. But also, to me, one of the maybe scariest things was how quickly America at large took on this pain. And their definition of American was this sort of white heartland America. And meanwhile, that is not our city. Our city is super complex. Our city is full of immigrants. Our city is every color and every person on top of each other. And that was the thing that was lost in that moment. That was the place that was wounded. And yet the way that it was spoken about was as though it was an attack on this sort of heartland white American. And that was also really wild to me. Like, it made me so angry because I was like, you're yelling about this stuff about America, but you don't even know the city you're yelling about. Like, this is us. Mm-hmm. We are like this. We are this complex thing, this thing that you no longer have room for, this thing that you're like, that's enough of that, enough of giving those people a chance. That is the city that got hit. That is the heart that broke. So whenever I think about it, I have those twin reactions. I don't know. I'm talking a lot. What did you think about it? What do you feel?
No, it's okay. No, it's amazing. Yeah, I cannot believe it's been 20 years. I can't. I don't know. I can't believe that I'm old enough to have had something happen of such magnitude in my adult life that was actually 20 years ago.
Yeah. Where were you?
I was in Boston. I had just started business school at Harvard, and I lost my best friend and roommate she was my roommate all of college and after college and in New York. And then I left her to go to business school, and she worked in the North Tower. So yeah, so I was in Boston that day. And then the next morning I woke up and drove back to the city.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I know, it was so hard. But then I was trying to find her. And actually in your book, I was looking at the papers. You called it, what did you call it? Something beautiful, like a wall of paper,
Paper City.
Paper City, yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, how crazy would it be if she was one of those posters? But she wasn't. But anyway.
Yeah, I tried to, that image specifically was built from stock photos, but I actually took care to kind of take off the names as much as possible because I didn't want to traumatize somebody who saw the poster of their loved one there. Like, this poster lived in my life in a very specific way, but I imagine in somebody else's, it's just an open wound.
Unbelievable. Well, back to, the lightness here of the everyday. Yeah. What are you working on now? And what can we expect from you next? And then also, what advice would you have for aspiring authors?
Woo. Okay, so right now I'm working on two things. I am working on a television script, and that's exciting and fun and weird. It's based on the book, and yet not really, because I went ahead and fictionalized everything so I could actually not talk about my marriage anymore. I think it was a good smart thing to do. Also, because I'm actually my first book was a novel, and I've gone back to writing fiction. And I think I'm just much more comfortable writing fiction, to be honest. Okay. There's a lot more freedom in writing fiction. So yeah, I've started another book, and I'm calling it a mystery, but it's a mystery in the way, it's not, no one else would call it a mystery but me, basically. But that's what I'm doing right now. I'm working on that.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
And advice to writers, any advice to writers?
Whatever you want to say. Aspiring authors, aspiring writers, either way.
Okay, I'll tell you all what I told my class. So I teach at the new school and at the MFA program in Randolph. And one of the things that I tell my grad students a lot is that when you leave a grad program, it's very easy not to feel like a writer anymore, because you're not surrounded by writing, because you're not actively pursuing something. And even if you've got something that you're working on, there are days and sometimes weeks and sometimes months where your manuscript or your drive fails you. And that's, to me, the most horrifying thing is when I don't feel like a writer anymore. That's a pretty desolate feeling. So really practical advice, if you're in that place and you're listening to this, a really easy way to get yourself back is to start with 20 minutes. And what that means is you set a timer for 20 minutes. You write for those 20 minutes. If you got the 20 minutes done, boom, you're a writer. Go on to the next day. And the way that I do this when I'm falling off is I do it every other day at first, and then I go to every day, and it builds that muscle back up, but it also puts me back in touch with my interior in a way where I'm no longer scared of it. I'm no longer scared of my ability to make sentences of feelings. So that's my advice. So practical.
I love that advice. That's good.
I'm a Capricorn, and I just realized like that was the least sexy, most like, here's how to get it done, folks, advice.
You know what? Sometimes people need that advice. Maybe that was the advice that someone out there really, really needed to hear today, and they just got it. I hope so.
All right.
Too. Okay.
Someone out there, if you needed that advice, go end this podcast and go sit down and write your 20 minutes.
Exactly. You can dedicate it to Mira. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for this conversation. I really was moved by your book and found it just incredibly innovative and funny and moving and cool and awesome, and pretty much how I felt about you when I got to know you as a person. So there you go.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me.
My pleasure. All right. Take care.
All right.
Okay. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.